Jamie Dimon, just a few years ago, when he was asked about the losses that they suffered, described their trading as flawed, complex, poorly reviewed, and poorly monitored. Sounds an awful lot like Barings, which was 15 years or so before. So it's simply not good enough. An event that I spoke at a couple of years ago, somebody broke some really bad news to me. He'd obviously been searching through the internet, looking for details that he could bring to the table about my life, and he told me that I was down to 14th in the list of all-time losses. So he wanted to know what I was going to do about it. So I told him I was back in training, looking for a new bank, and hopefully I'd work my way back up the league table fairly soon. You know, I know that's not going to happen unless there's a bank in Nigeria looking for a risk manager, maybe. I am only joking. Although my salary could just be jollof rice or something like that, if anybody's interested. So and I'm trying to leave you time for questions as well. So by 1994, my trading was out of control. I was the biggest trader on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange by a country mile. The president of the exchange was encouraging me to do more business, so he was showing me a lot of orders off exchange, completely illegal, but obviously the exchange was looking for more and more volume. So Ang Swee Chien, the president, would invite me to his office and he would show me a lot of these off-market transactions, because all they wanted to see within, you know, back in 1995, when you looked at Reuters or Bloomberg and you wanted to see whether it was worthwhile trading somewhere, the only things that you looked at were the open interest and the volume. And if the volume was tiny, you had no interest in trading there. So I was great for the Singapore International Monetary Exchange because I was so out of control. So in 1994, the management of Barings were invited from London, New York and Tokyo to come to Singapore, to the Singapore International Monetary Exchange's big award ceremony, and we won an award for the highest customer volume on Cymex. That award was for my illegal 5/8 account, because my illegal 5/8 account was 95% of the volume that we were trading in Singapore. But still, people didn't ask questions. We didn't have any clients. We only had 2 clients, which was Barings London and Barings Tokyo. So people weren't putting the pieces together and challenging what was going on intelligently. The one day that happened was the 23rd of February 1995. For 3 years, nobody did a position check. For anybody who works in a bank, I worked for Morgan Stanley. If the controllers would come round every day, and the first thing at 8 a.m. is they would do a position check. If your positions didn't agree, you didn't trade. My positions didn't agree for 3 years. We only had 2 accounts, a London account and a Tokyo account. You add the 2 together, you compare it to the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, and there was a huge discrepancy every day for 3 years. And nobody did that reconciliation. Nobody in settlements, nobody in the internal audit department, the external auditors, or any of the board of directors. The only time that it was done was on the 23rd of February 1995. Somebody brought me the reconciliation. I was confronted by the 5/8 account in black and white, and I did the only thing that I could do at that stage, which was leave very quickly and run away from Singapore. So I went home, I told my wife we needed to leave very quickly. She had no idea what was going on. We fled and arrived in Kota Kinabalu, and on the 25th of February I woke up in the Shangri-La Hotel in Kota Kinabalu. I went down into the newsagents in that hotel, and I picked up the newspaper of choice, which was the Asian Wall Street Journal, and the headline was "British Bank Collapses." My immediate thought at the time was, that's brilliant, somebody's in more trouble than me. And then I slowly started to read it and realized that it was me. I'm going to finish in 1 minute. Just a couple of quick fire things just to give you some food for thought. Knowledge is nothing without understanding. At Barings, the typical employee from Barings went to the best schools, they went to the best universities, they had the best educations, but they knew nothing about the business, and for that reason, they couldn't challenge me or anybody else within the organisation. So knowledge is nothing without understanding. Quick example of that, the compliance department in the Singapore International Monetary Exchange were very worried about my 5/8 account, how big it was getting, how we were going to unwind it, and the potential exposure it was putting the market to. They sent a letter to James Bax, who was the CEO of Barings. He knew nothing about futures and options, so he gave the letter to Simon Jones, who was the head of settlements in Barings in Singapore. He knew nothing about futures and options, so he gave the letter to me. So it was me answering this very serious letter from the compliance department of the exchange about my illegal 5/8 account. Exactly the same when Deloitte & Touche came in to do the audit. I was always the point of referral, and I was never going to tell them what the illegal 5/8 account was really being used for. I'm going to do these very quickly. Peter Norris, the CIO of Barings, you ask him what he thought he did least well during his time at Barings. Baring Brothers was a 233-year-old merchant bank. Barings Securities was 10 years old. Very different in their culture, their conduct, and the way that they approached business. So I've met Peter a number of times since that time, apologised unreservedly for my actions, which I needed to do. But if you ask Peter what his biggest fault was, it was that he didn't manage the change and the consolidation of those two organisations particularly well. So if your organisations are getting bigger, if you're acquiring new firms, make sure that you manage that change and consolidation as well as you possibly can. If you don't, change always creates fear and uncertainty, and then people behave in irregular ways. Risk management, if you want a risk-intelligent organisation, you need risk-intelligent people. Make sure you invest in them as well as you can. Transparency. Transparency will always outlast charisma. I was the charismatic individual that was responsible for all the profits that the bank was making at the time, but it was a tissue of lies. So the more transparent your organisations can be, the better you'll become. I have a very good friend who runs a big European bank. He uses my story to explain a very simple message to all of his staff. He delivers it personally, or to groups of people. He tells them about my story, and he tells them one very simple thing. He expects them to make mistakes. He doesn't encourage them to make mistakes, but he expects them to make mistakes. What he doesn't expect them to do is hide them. What he wants them to do is to bring them to his door and explain them to him, and he will help them through the process of dealing with that mistake. I think it's a really important message. Last one before I go, structure, if you get it right, should always out-trump conduct. And conduct is where people go wrong. Are we going to do questions, or have I overrun that badly? Thank you.
Now, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is what always happens, and we have just entered the statistics. After he speaks, there's hardly much time. And so it's happening again tonight. We will be taking 2 questions. Of course, 2 questions directed at Nick. So there are 2 ladies, one on either side of the hall, who will hand you the microphone. Please tell us who you are and ask your question very briefly. Thank you.
Good evening. Name is Aaron Ayobola Ajayi. And I must admit that I'm very, very impressed with the remorse expressed by the speaker, Mr. Leeson. I only wish that our corrupt elements will emulate his example. And I want to find out if he had enough disincentives, right, before committing those acts, the things that he did, if there were some certain things that would have prevented him, apart from the fact that there were some structural defects and all that, some deficiencies in the system, some things that will have prevented him from doing what he did.
The honest answer, I think you need to my story should be a preventative measure in itself, or it should be a reason not to make it a fantastic story, but it should be a reason why people are aware of the consequences of such actions. I think one of the things for me, and this has developed over time, people learn ethics in a classroom. Ethics in a classroom doesn't translate into an organization. It's an applied science when you work in an organization, and no two organizations are the same. So you need to continue, whatever your mission statement are, or the values of your company, they need to be regularly communicated to the people that work for you. I mean, I think if you go around your organization and you ask what the values of your company are, you'll find that not as many people know as you think. And that's not good, because that means that the culture that you're trying to enforce within your organization is not permeating the organization as well as it should. In the world of banking, it's more pronounced, because what you find is that the traders are treated very differently than the people who work in the settlements area. Equally so, that's not right. So any sort of culture or conduct process that you have to have within an organization, it has to be consistent across the whole firm, and it needs to be communicated effectively. As I said, when I was talking about ethical compass, I never went to a training course at Barings. I never went, it was very much sink or swim. I loved the opportunity, and I grabbed the opportunity with both hands, but you were always it was very trial and error, the way that you survived. Was there one more?
My name is Taba Peterside, Quayside Resources. You said before you got to Barings, it had been a history of successes. So when you're talking about the motivation, and then you talked about fear of failure, which is what kept you, what continued to drive you. Well, I'm just trying to understand where the failure initially came from. If you were doing your trades and so on, was there one or two particular original failures that led to a deeper and deeper hole? You just clarify that.
I mean, I'll give you the exact answer. There were two Nikkei 225 products. One was in Tokyo or in Osaka, and the other was in Singapore. So we used to arbitrage between the two. But Japan at the time was trading at 40,000. So I think it trades about 20 now. It's been down as low as 9. So it was at the peak of its economic prosperity, if you like. And the market started to collapse. And so there were circuit breakers in Japan. When the circuit breakers would kick in every 700 points, the market fell. When the circuit breakers kicked in, nobody could trade. So then all of the business shifted to Singapore. So a contract that used to trade 2,000 contracts a day immediately started trading 25,000 contracts a day. So the exchange wasn't ready for it, the brokers and the banks weren't ready for it. So there was this huge increase in business, no increase in people. And so when you match a trade, it was open outcry at the time. So you used to have to match trades within a 30-minute period. It was taking us 14 hours to match trades because there was so much documentation going into the Cymex system. Cymex system was collapsing, so you couldn't match the trades. So one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, one of the girls had passed the order incorrectly to the traders. So she'd passed it as a buy instead of a sell. We had to make the customer good, which meant that we had double the exposure to the market. And that was the trade I put into the illegal 5/8 account, which then started the whole sorry story. The very next morning, I reported it to Simon Jones, who was the head of settlements in Singapore. Simon told me, obviously, there's a 6 or 7 hour difference between Singapore and London. Simon told me to refer it to Andrew Bayliss. I didn't do that. I was worried that the young girl who made the mistake was going to lose her job, so I left it in the illegal 5/8 account, and the situation just started to get worse from there. And then I was more complicit in it than I was the day before. So that was the genuine reason why it occurred. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you very much.